Well, hello and welcome again to CrossWorlds. This is the program where we look at the future of the Metaverse, keeping the whole Metaverse-wide arena in focus. And tonight, I have a guest whose LinkedIn summary describes him as a man of many talents and involvements, brackets, often in parallel. So it's very hard to know where to start. He's known in Second Life as Aeon. I have a problem with
Aeonix.
Aeonix, yes. And in real life, his name is Will Burns. So we sort of
no relation.
No relation. Yeah, exactly. But the Two Burns show. How does that sound, folks? Yeah. Right. Anyway, Will is involved with, particularly with object interoperability. He's the lead with the IEEE Virtual World Standards group. And that's one of the main areas we're going to be focusing on tonight. For those of you watching live, by the way, and anybody in the audience here, my colleague at NBC, Does a Dragon Ash, is actually monitoring chat, and we will have a little bit later in the show where we get any questions that you might have to put to Will during the course of our conversation. But until then, we're just going to keep it sort of fairly loose and discuss what's going on at the moment and what's going on in the future, so to speak. So, without further ado, welcome to CrossWorlds, Will.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I think the best place to start, which I normally do with most of my guests, is I just leave it up to you to sort of introduce yourself, maybe give a little background, a bit of history, and brief on where you're coming from and what you're doing now and what it involves, and then we'll sort of take it from there.
All right, I'll try to keep that one succinct and to the point. Yeah, well, I've had about 15, 16 years in virtual environments professionally. I got my start way back in the day when Active Worlds was just hitting the scene. Worked across a number of systems. Used to be CTO of VR5 Online and had a project called Nidus. The original intention was to push that system, Active Worlds, to the breaking point, and I did that quite often, actually. But it was to find out how people react to virtual environments. Most notably, looking into stuff like Metaverse and how best to approach an open-ended virtual environment in terms of marketing or just public perception. From there, 2007, I moved on to private consulting and did a lot of work with gaming companies and got called in for trend forecasting and stuff. And now I've gone on to work with research for Loyola Marymount University out in Los Angeles and Solipsys Decentralized Metaverse, and have contributed to the Metaverse roadmap. So those are the big things leading up to today, which is that I am the Object Interoperability Leader for IEEE Virtual World Standard Group. I think that about covers it.
Great. Well, I'll get you to describe more what the standards group is about. I must say it's rather ironic because I came over to visit your sim earlier today, and I think we share the criticism in common about gaming. So when you said you were working with gaming then, I went, oh. But maybe you could let us know really what we on previous shows here we discussed a lot of things like the hypergrid, the way that connects sims together and various things. I noticed the work that you're doing is actually more centered from Second Life, working out, as it were. And but I wonder if you can just explain a little bit more about what the virtual world standards themselves are entailing.
Well, in general, what we're looking at is not so much any particular environment. I just happen to be coming from the Second Life environment, though I do have involvement actively in Active Worlds and other environments as well. I just prefer to work from here outwards. There are other things like Jibe and a couple of other virtual environments involved. So we do get a nice cross-section there. A lot of it boils down to trying to identify the common ground between all virtual environments, open-ended virtual environments, and how they can find a protocol and common ground between each other, regardless of whatever proprietary systems may be in play on the back end. So in terms of Second Life, what we can say is they have a lot of proprietary things going on behind the scenes, and we don't want to interfere with those proprietary systems. We want to say there's a common ground in the middle of these different systems that they can communicate on, which will allow for interoperability, allow maybe assets, identifying assets that are open, limited, and proprietary, and then trying to encourage the use of open formats and protocols to allow everybody to talk to each other on the same page.
Well, we did mention earlier something which is rather acute here, and it resonates with what we've talked about in this series so far. For the most part, we tend to have been dealing with OpenSim and Hypergrid, all of which share some sort of kind of commonality, and many of which are derived from, similar background to Second Life. But one really crucial thing we start seeing the difference in is with the hypergrid, the idea is you have openly connected grids, even including grids that people are self-hosting on their own, obsolete computers as servers and connecting to the grid. Whereas you've got platforms like Second Life, where we're filming tonight, also Spot on 3D, InWorlds and whatever, that seem to be almost copying Second Life's what we might call a walled garden model. And how easy is do you think interoperability is going to be when we have these walled gardens sort of standing out like sore thumbs in the middle of what could be a greater metaverse?
Well, in terms of the walled gardens, it really does come down to whether or not they are interested in actually being interoperable. I mean, there's a larger aspect to it all, where you could have access to a larger experience versus having some sort of monetary reason for staying within your own walled garden, and that's usually just on a business aspect. So whether or not an open sort of metaverse would come of it is really up to whether or not the proprietary systems and walled gardens want to play along, or if they see any reason to. Though, in my opinion, I don't believe it's going to really matter if they want to play along or not. If you create an open sort of system with standards, you are encouraging the open proliferation of those standards for everybody, so it'll grow on its own one way or the other. Whether or not they want to play along or not is up to them. We're not going to hold anybody's nose to the grindstone and say, you must do this. It's completely voluntary. It's just a lot of recommendations.
Yeah, I think, well, I wonder if it's just a matter of how long we have to wait for them to wake up, because I do foresee when you look at something like Hypergrid, where you've got a lot of grids, for example, they're very small, some very specialized, some a bit more general, but when you start viewing them as a whole, and the fact that interoperability amongst them is going in leaps and bounds, then there will, I would hope, come a point where the open metaverse, if you like, is suddenly, when you add everything together, is actually bigger than Second Life or any of the other walled gardens, and they'll suddenly think, oh, well, to tap into this market, to get these people into our world, we're going to have to cooperate. We're going to have to let them hypergrid in or something. Since we're here in Second Life, do you see any moves by Linden Lab, for example, to accommodate this kind of thing, or do you possibly feel that Linden Labs are actually taking a completely different direction that may not be helpful at all?
I'm kind of on the fence about that. I mean, I see some things being enacted on the side of Linden Lab that could hold promise in the bigger scheme of things, though I don't really see them being enacted in a way that is favorable to an open metaverse. I see them more as internal kind of changes that will benefit them. Until I see that interoperability, that olive branch, so to speak, going out. I'm not going to, say either way whether, their internal planning is, going in that direction. As it stands right now, I would say they seem to be more concerned about their walled garden than anything else. So, a good example, I guess, would be the big issue of the parametric deformer project for the mesh, where, we can get into that, where, the JIRA and all, a large base of the community was saying, this is something that needs to be done to mesh in order to make it workable for, the community and the content creators. And the initial reaction was, someday maybe, whatever that means. And, that's kind of like a slap to the face. But then, when the community jumps in and they say, well, if you're not going to do it, then, we will raise the funds to do it ourselves and hire Carl. And that's brilliant. But it kind of makes me scratch my head, because as a company, you would think that, your community, your users, raising the money to have a third party do something that should be blatantly obvious and done within the confines of Linden Lab, would be a blemish on your record. So, and I've heard people say, well, Linden Lab also offered their own quote unquote solution, or possible solution. And that was, from my understanding, using Havoc to, implement roughly the same thing. And to me, that's not really doesn't come across as a viable solution, because it would be a proprietary solution. And that really kind of gets me, thinking, okay, well, they really weren't trying. They were saying, well, here's a half-assed kind of solution, knowing full well that a fully open solution could have been done very, just within the same premise, which is what Carl would be doing. And they should have been offering that off the bat.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Havoc is a particular engine, as they say in the trade, that Second Life uses to bring its world to you. But even though a lot of open sim technology is based on similar sort of infrastructure, they don't use that engine because it costs quite a lot of money. So anything that would be done in Havoc by Second Life, for example, would remain part of Second Life's property and wouldn't be available to anybody else, which is what we were saying there, really.
Right, so Havoc being a physics engine, a very costly physics engine, there's no way that the open sim community as a whole would put in that kind of money for licensing. I would also, venture to say that it would go against everything that they're doing anyway, to have that kind of proprietary thing built into it, or trying to raise the money to keep up with it. So to me, having Linden Lab offer that as a quote-unquote solution was really a dirty tactic, saying, well, yeah, we'll do it, but, nobody else can have it, or, you got to pay X amount of money to have this proprietary system that we know you're not going to be able to do, or you're not going to be willing to integrate. So it was a non-solution to me. And looking at it from the community base, knowing that Carl could go ahead and do something that would be open and available to everybody, Linden Lab can't deny that such a solution would be possible, nor could they deny that they don't, that they have the manpower to do it. They just are kind of focused on other things. Whether that's good or bad is up for debate, but, it really shouldn't have come down to that. Any company that throws something out like Mesh and then says, well, your community says it's broken in a very fundamental way, and it becomes unusable for content creators. Well, that, if this is your baby, this is your, your big reveal after all this work, then why are you letting it out, half broken? Why are you letting your community go in and do your job to fix it up? it should have been a yes, we'll get right on that because it's a major focus.
I hate to say it, but I look at a lot of companies, especially the bigger they are these days, and, it seems that customer service is almost nothing. You think if you're providing services, you should be listening to customers, but people seem to endlessly produce services and then think, we'll dictate what the customers want, be it an ISP or be it an operating system provider. They tend to have an extraordinary arrogance, when they're dealing with our customer base. But the good news, of course, I did read today is that the funding for the Carl, I was about to say Carl Linden. Yeah, the funding for that project has actually been reached, so we can wish it the best. And I can't swear to this, but I think it may have been Chris Collins, another former Linden, who was talking about various open source development and saying, we're going to do this, this, and this, and we're going to make it freely available to anybody who wants to use it, unless it's Linden Labs, in which case they could damn well pay us a small fortune. Yeah, because, it's sort of flipping the coin, isn't it? If the open source people can do it, then, open it up to the code sharing community and then tell Lindens, well, you got to pay for it. You're not code sharing.
Well, they like to do that to the community, They like to say, well, we'll come up with a solution, but it'll involve a highly pricey proprietary physics engine that we know you can't use. So, of course, you would expect them to come back and say, okay, well, we'll come up with all this stuff and everybody gets it for free except for you. We can play that game too. The only difference is that I think the open source community is really making more headway than Linden Lab, which is kind of concerning me at this point. Not because I, don't believe that they should be, but I believe that a company with the resources and rockstar power that Linden Lab is amassing at this point should not be in a position where they're dropping the ball as much as they are. That's kind of disconcerting to me.
Yeah. It's funny, big, well, in the global sense of things, Linden Labs is actually quite a small company, but in our field, it's obviously a big, company in the sense that it's a forerunner of many things. But they, the more people get established, the more they do seem to be less open to the very kind of frontierism and collaboration, as it were, that got them started in the first place. It's, Linden Labs is good. Let me go back to the fact that I popped over to your sim earlier, and
I have to correct you. It's not my sim. It's the actual IEEE sim.
Okay. Well, the IEEE sim then. I was kind of intrigued. We took one picture of the structure of the standards group, as it were, which will we don't have it live at the moment, I'm afraid, but it probably strips into the edit later. But you also showed me a couple of other things. Now, I'm going to leave it up to you how much you want to tell me. But there was one very intriguing thing I saw, which was sort of a game of Pong. I think we English have a different word for it, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Yeah, it's that table tennis thing, like you got on the old, it was the first sort of video game thing there was. I remember when I was, I was young, I gave my baby nephews some advice that allowed them to do that kind of stuff on their TV set. Apparently the thing I saw you've got actually communicates beyond Second Life. In other words, I hope I'm not giving anything away when I say that the idea is you had Second Life at one end and Active Worlds at the other end.
Right,
maybe
I checked earlier, and I'm not going to get yelled at for disclosing some amount of it, but there's going to be no demos at this point in time until we get everything hashed out for public consumption. But I can talk about it.
Conceptually, as it were. Maybe.
Conceptually, I can talk about it. I'm not going to go into demos or anything like that until we're really solid on it. But as far as the Pong game goes, the idea of the demonstrations over at IEEE are going to be a public discussion over what actually is involved with interoperability and standards. What kinds of stuff, what kinds of assets, what kind of protocols, what kind of things need to happen in order to allow something to move from one space, virtual environment space like Second Life, to something completely different on a system structure like Active Worlds. They don't talk the same language, so we have to start finding some commonality here. And between at least Active Worlds and Second Life, the commonality is right now the HTTP kind of protocol where we can send stuff back and forth and, pretty simply, and we can just relay some data back and forth. And on the active world side, that would be a C# kind of bot using your API. Because there is no in-world scripting over there, so we have to run a bot program that's designed to interpret all that and send it over there. And we do the same thing. The goal is to do the same thing across multiple worlds, maybe Web Alive via and let's see, Jibe, I think, is one of them. So Unity, stuff like that, and we try to find commonality where we can say Second Life to this, or Unity to communicate with the active world's world, and so on and so forth. Get them all working together, so where we can select on the game what environment it's going to as the other side of the portal, so to speak. So the idea is to be able to hit a puck, very simple, and control the puck on this side, and then have the puck go down the little field, disappear, and show up on the other side. At this point, it's really just relaying the information. It's not really copying objects or anything over because we don't have that kind of power, or we don't want to step on any toes by doing that. However, in the future, that would be something along the lines of saying, is it full permissions? If it's full permissions, then by all means, we should be able to read the information off of the object, maybe the puck, and try to translate that into the other environment so it can reconstruct it on the fly. And we go through step by step, phase by phase, and figure out what needs to be transferred. Do we need to look at the assets? What sort of assets, such as textures? What kind of sound effects? What formats are available to both sides of the coin? And we go down the line. What protocols? What information? Is this XML? Can we do this in a common ground? And what we do is we keep building up on that as we go and keep adding to it. So at some point, as we keep building on this, we will be able to just have an object or something in another world that just reads all the information from a central point, or maybe a PHP server or something that will be able to reconstruct everything. As it is right now, it's just a protocol where we're sending information back and forth to show the feasibility. And we do that with the Stargate project as well, which is sending information to a PHP system on a web server, which in turn communicates with the Stargate to send the command and information to send a ball through. The next stage of that would be to be able to take a ball, maybe an object, and throw it at it, and then have it go to a different Stargate somewhere else and pop out. So there's different layers here, and the idea between all these demonstrations is to publicly show different concepts that need to be in play, things that we need to think about while we're looking at interoperability and standards. What needs to happen step by step, and that's a very convoluted process. I mean, everything that you look at in the standards process, when you change one little idea, it cascades to the entire thing like a domino effect. So we have to choose very wisely, or at least give options. I don't, as an object interoperability guy, I'm not looking at it as you have to use PNG. I'm not going to come out and say, okay, you have to use PNG for this. What I will say is that here are some formats in textures that are open and unfettered, and these are recommended. Here's some limited formats that may or may not cause you problems if you're using them, and here are some proprietary ones. We would suggest you use the open standard ones for the transfer, because those are the ones that are most likely to be available to everybody and widely accepted. So that's what we're doing. We're not saying you have to use anything. We're just saying here's a list of things that are likely to be used. And if you want to have a higher degree of interoperability, it would be in best interest to look for those common grounds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to bring this a bit back toward layman's language here, actually, for the benefit of some of our viewers. I think if we look back at the birth of the World Wide Web, for example, Tim Berners-Lee obviously created certain protocols that he gave away, effectively. And all the subsequent things that happen via the web, particularly, and elsewhere on the internet to a certain extent, have obviously been built on and derived from those original protocols, even though they're kind of changing now. I think I'm right in putting it like that. One of the clear problems with virtual spaces, immersive spaces, virtual worlds, call them what you will, even including games, is that there was never any groundwork, no commonality, as it were, on which any of these things were built. So your task in finding common elements must surely be increasingly difficult, because the examples you were giving me just now sounded to me like most of this interop will happen via the web, HTTP commands, etc. So the web is being used as a conduit for this interoperability. Are you or anybody else searching for any kind of standards that could be an underlying infrastructure common to all virtual spaces that is as fundamental as something like the HTTP protocols itself? If I know what I'm talking about there, which I probably don't.
We'll call that close enough. A lot of there's been discussion about the underlying protocol stuff, like is it appropriate to focus on TCP, HTTP, or maybe even UDP? And a lot of the conversation comes up where TCP is excelling in one area but is deficient in another, while UDP is kind of the opposite. So they're kind of like a yin and yang kind of situation. There's been discussion about specialized protocols which would be open, such as a proposal for VRTP, giving it its own channel, and open protocol to allow for a large bandwidth transfer of information. And that's kind of on the table, but it's not really, we're kind of sorting that out. As it stands, where we're at right now is that a lot of these walled gardens, such as Second Life, only give you a very narrow kind of method to do this with. So they say, you can communicate outside with maybe HTTP or UTI or URI data or something like that. And those are, they have their limitations. A good example would be when we were doing the initial test for the Pong game between Second Life and ActiveWorlds. ActiveWorlds doesn't have a governor, so to speak. It doesn't have a limit on how fast you can send information. So what we were finding is that from here to ActiveWorlds, it was almost instantaneous. But coming back from ActiveWorlds into Second Life, there's probably a 1.5 to 1.7 second delay. And, those are limitations within the system here where we don't have unfettered access to, have a direct connection like that. So a lot of this boils down to trying to work out how to, as a first step, I would say, first step, working with what we've got, even though it is quite limited, and then saying this is the ideal end goal, where everybody would be talking on a more specialized and structured channel or formats and so on and so forth, where it would be beneficial and high speed for everybody. And it becomes an agnostic kind of search, where we're not saying that, we're not saying that Second Life is the future or OpenSim is the future. We're not saying that, Blue Mars or ActiveWorlds or, Hi or, any of these systems are the future. We're saying that together, taken as a whole, they could be, if they are all interlinked as a greater metaverse. So, the walled garden approach, you did, sum it up pretty well earlier, where, they don't have really any incentive to work with the outside world. And as great as OpenSim is, it's still not there is no connectivity to other virtual environments. So it's still, to me, an island unto itself, where we're using our own protocols, and it's good. It's good. It's a good first step. However, it doesn't connect to, say, Blue Mars. It doesn't connect to ActiveWorlds. There is no initiative to have a greater metaverse there. Right now, they're kind of in their own ecosystem, which is still a good first step. It's better than the first walled garden, which is Second Life. So we're seeing that little bit of evolution there. But in my perspective, it gets a lot bigger than that. It gets to a point where as long as there's a commonality and there's a standard, any system can interface with any other system, regardless if you're Second Life, if you're Blue Mars, if you're Active Worlds, or any of these systems that may pop up now or later. Maybe there could be something completely different. Maybe Solipsis as a decentralized metaverse system, if they have that hook in there to communicate in a standards compliant way, then they could, freely exchange the data and information as needed from an open source kind of method, or maybe even Second Life or anything else, as long as everybody's on the same page. So it's not necessarily targeting anything in particular, just saying within the limitations, how do we get everybody to talk to each other?
Yeah. I'm keen to actually bring the conversation a bit back into the central area and look at sort of the ways things like assets might be shared, which of course are objects. We were talking earlier, actually about two things. One was, the need for exportable options in walled gardens like Second Life, where you have the permissions. And I in fact, was amazed to finding some research for the show. In fact, I found one fashion house in Second Life who was new to me, completely new to me. But I checked out their website, and they literally have shops selling their goods in I think about 20 different open sim grids, which was very impressive, because I know of a couple of designers who've got a shop in Worlds and in Second Life and maybe 3 places or something, but not this catalogue of shops that this lady actually has. But we were also talking about viewers, and I do know that people who do the open source Imprudence viewer, which is used a lot for going into open sims, have actually got another sort of viewer on the horizon. There's not much known about it yet, but one thing I really long for is a Metaverse viewer that is stripped of all the dependency on the groundwork that's been done by Second Life. I don't mean every single thing, but I mean the fact that there isn't a viewer that I can go into an open sim with at the moment that isn't cluttered up by a button saying copy slurl to clipboard, which of course is a redundant function unless it's a Second Life location, and various artifacts in the user interface that are clearly stuff from early Second Life. And I'd really like to see something that is a really simple, stripped down viewer that was maybe modular, that could incorporate the things that you've been talking about as and when they become available. Open systems. Maybe they could incorporate the open avatar thing that Vastvark have been working on, or different things as they come along that could be kind of stripped into the interface. I mean,
I believe that actually goes down to the level of the actual servers as well. Same process there, where they start removing the dependencies on Linden Lab to be a truly open metaverse sort of system from ground up. That would be a more viable future than to have constant dependency on a walled garden. In my going back to the export of the assets and stuff, we may or may not agree or disagree on how to go about that. I mean, I don't, as my understanding goes, I would say that being in a position to just simply export manually isn't necessarily a good option. It puts a lot of undue stress and work on the actual content creators versus having some sort of system in place where the servers themselves, the asset servers, would have some sort of trusted authentication between different systems. So maybe OpenSim could have a certificate system or something to that nature where it would be known as a trusted grid. And at which point, just logging in over there with an actual identity, a trusted identity, would allow you to automatically pull your inventory from other trusted asset servers. So if I had, a trusted assets over here with my identity, going over there, my identity would be, authenticated and trusted in some manner, and would give me immediate rights to pull those assets from this server over here, and maybe make appropriate DRM copies. And although I think DRM is a bad word, it can be used for good if it's not draconian. Obviously, we want the protections for the content creators, but having actual access in an automatic fashion, where it's really just a matter of setting up a trusted identity and trusted authentication between the asset systems, where I would just log in over there with a trusted identity and it would just pull it automatically into my inventory over there. It would save a lot of effort in having to do all this manual exporting, and this is just tedious, and that's really a side effect of creating all these closed and walled gardens. I'm more interested in the open-ended aspect of it, where we have this basic ability to have a trusted identity and basic ability to authenticate and have a trusted server, to where the content creator doesn't need to do this. They shouldn't be required to do this on a manual. And I totally commend that content creator for having so many shops, because as it stands, I would imagine that was a lot of manual work on her end to do it. So, in my view, it should have been an automatic system.
This actually brings me to another point interesting, where it's something I don't think we did mention earlier at all. I sometimes, recently I should say, I've been wondering whether Linda Lab might have actually opened the gates accidentally in some ways, because the introduction of mesh, and of course the the whole thing with Carl, is actually basically to use mesh in Second Life, the new big thing. There are no actual tools in world for actually creating mesh objects. It is, the world is still prim based. What you can now do is you can import mesh. And for anybody who's going to be taking this seriously, and all the signs are that a lot of people, there's a lot more mesh around now than I thought there would be at this early stage. Psychologically, what they're doing is they are shifting the onus of creating out of world, because you have to approach it as out of world construction that you then import into Second Life. And likewise, people are hosting their own OpenSim or have spaces on OpenSims can create in OpenSims where they can back up and archive what they've created and then import them into somewhere like Second Life. Likewise, the Fastpark's open avatar system relies heavily on mesh, but although you couldn't travel with that avatar into Second Life, you could import a copy of that avatar into Second Life so that you had a duplicate avatar in Second Life as would exist in your open avatar, so to speak. And I'm wondering if Linden's are actually creating a culture now where an increasing number of people, because of mesh, will be authoring out of Second Life and importing. And this might be a kind of, the thing that makes people swing to the idea of authoring offline, even with prim work, which, and of course, this would change the whole balance. Even one of the, just say, the game of Pong that you were authoring, if it was authored and built wholly, including the scripts and anything else outside of Second Life, and then imported as an asset, and obviously it can be imported into all sorts of other places, then in a way, the closed garden has broken down a bit, hasn't it? Just by introducing this new method of working.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. However, it does come back to whether or not those assets are, automatically available through trusted identities and trusted servers, through that certificate kind of authentication. Right now, it's still going to be a very manual process on the part of the content creator. So if I wanted to cross multiple worlds, I'm going to have to import this all manually. I'm going to have to go to each individual world, set up an account, set up, maybe a funded sort of thing where I have to put in some money, or maybe it'll just give me some money for content creation, as an incentive. But I still have to do a lot of time and effort into importing everything manually. Yeah. And that's really the crux of the argument here, is that, while this is available, even in the mesh aspect of it, the main target here is to be able to automatically be able to share that if I've, with proper rights. It should have the trusted identity. It should have that trusted server certificate somewhere where, an OpenSIM would just say, well, if it exists somewhere in a trusted identity, then I should have access to those assets because assets are agnostic on the higher aspect of things. I mean, they are just textures. They are just 3D models. And the only thing that's different is the rights to them. So whether I have full permissions or whether I just have copy permissions, it would be something like having another checkbox saying this item is available to trusted authorities. And that's not a huge throw of the stone to be able to do that.
Mm. And it's funny, in the value element, I mentioned to you earlier, the thing I often think about now is the way the film and concert marketing industry works. You buy a DVD and you quite often find there's a free digital copy enclosed, even though you might be able to buy the digital copy elsewhere. And now if you buy a Blu-ray disc, for example, a lot of them come with an extra DVD plus a digital copy. So you're getting all the rights in what you pay for, as specified by the market level you enter. So if you buy the Blu-ray, you get the whole lot downwards. If you buy the DVD, you don't get the Blu-ray, but you get the digital copy and stuff like that. Now, and you were also mentioning something earlier that I think is quite important in the idea of the value of assets and movement, and that was the difference you see, and I totally agree with you, between production environment cost and consumer costs. And we were noting that in virtual worlds, even in OpenSim, some of the walled garden worlds there, the operators seem to be very confused themselves about what goods have production value and what goods merely have consumer value. Have you got anything to add on that?
Right. Well, the conversation was something along the lines of, and I really I don't want to come across like I'm singling anybody out, but I'm going to go with Spot On 3D for a good example here. It was a conversation that I did have with Tessa concerning this, that whether or not double Dutch delivery was a good idea, or whether or not consumers would be willing to pay for a higher price for the ability to have it delivered to, say, anything that supports double Dutch delivery. And my debate with her was around this very concept, concerning trying to give her an understanding, or try to convey to her that there's a difference between production value and consumer value. Something that is, of course, production value is expected to be used in production of other items. It's supposed to be high quality. It's supposed to be, really high quality textures and objects and 3D models and stuff like that. And those things, of course, are expected to have production value on them, maybe $50, $60 to $100 or more. If you look on TurboSquid, because those are two production value things. They're giving you full license rights to create content with them. And that, in Second Life, would be the equivalent of these builder packs where you have full permission sculpties and whatever else needs to happen there. And those are obviously priced a lot higher because those are production packs. Those are meant for the production of other objects and items and whatever else you're building. So then you look on the flip side of that coin, and you're looking at consumer aspects of things where, say, the pants and the shirt and the sneakers. Well, I'm not looking to create products with this, so it has a consumer value only. It doesn't escalate to a production value where I would need to associate that with full permissions and production value. And nor should it be priced in that manner, because nobody's going to pay production value for consumer value items. And this is where her and I really, had a heated debate about it. And for the life of me, I could not get this point across to her, that there is a big difference between associating production value costs or expansion costs for a business onto the consumers. The consumers will not really accept that in a wider base. I mean, you still have some people who will say, "Oh yeah, I'll pay the extra cost," or I think it's reasonable to pay $5, $10, $15 for the same shirt just to have that ability. But the real question is where does that end and begin? If you're in a walled garden, you're going from walled garden to walled garden, so you're charging production costs for consumer items, or you're charging the expansion cost for business on the consumers, and you're jacking up the price to do that. And I don't think the consumers are going to be very happy with that. Not when I mean, it doesn't make any sense to charge production costs for like a real life iPad. You're not going to charge somebody like $10,000 for an iPad because they can, because it costs that much to bring it to your neighborhood store. So while I do appreciate the work and stuff that needs to go into this from the content creator aspect, I'm looking at it from a bigger picture, as in there really shouldn't be a need for them to manually be doing this in the first place. I'm looking at solving that problem, from the top end down, as in this should be automatic. I mean, as long as there's trusted authorities, trust identity, and a way to access it, they shouldn't be doing this and, breaking themselves trying to keep up with all these different systems, not manually. Yeah. It's in the same manner of social media. I mean, a lot of us don't use social media in a way where we're doing everything manually. A lot of us have TweetDeck. A lot of us have different things like Plurk or broadcasting systems where we write something once and it goes everywhere. So we take the same mentality and say, well, I've imported it somewhere, and it is compatible in assets to OpenSim or anywhere else. So why not allow this to propagate elsewhere if I have the trusted authority to do so? So those are the two things that I look at. I'm not looking at it from, do I respect the content creators or not? Because I do. And I just believe they should be working a lot less to make this happen. And that's not going to come from their end. It comes from intelligently designing solutions versus trying to just patch it together.
You just reminded me, actually, that Second Life, of course, it was developed by Linden Lab, and it's in the name, really, isn't it? Linden Lab. They clearly work as a company these days, but I guess the name always made me think of them as an R&D sort of facility. And well, I don't know. It's just the name, but it's like you were saying about production costs. Basically, when you develop these things, it is an investment, and you're not you're not going to pass all of that investment cost onto the customer. The consumer pays off that investment cost slowly but surely by buying the items at a sort of consumer level. Okay, well, there's probably loads of questions I've all forgotten now, and we haven't got that much time. So what I'd like to do at the end of the show, really, is sort of look into the future, basically. I like to put people on the spot and say, well, from your perspective here, are we going to get interoperability? How do you think it will happen? Do you see any major obstacles? What are your either fears or hopes or both for the future and the way things are going?
That's a really open-ended question. Yeah.
Indeed. That's the idea.
Oh yeah. This is where we go down the rabbit hole and never return. No. I mean, it depends on what aspect we're looking at. I mean, I have a lot of interest across a lot of different subjects concerning virtual environments, and some things make me happy and other things really concern me. As far as the future goes, my biggest concern is that I've seen a lot of these open-ended kind of systems follow this walled garden mentality, and a lot of times the corporate aspect of it seems to take a lead that goes in a very different direction than what the actual intent of the platform is. They kind of misrepresent or misunderstand what it is that they have at their disposal, and they focus on things that aren't really imperative to the overall platform. So I am quite critical of Linden Lab, and it seems like I'm just out there with pitchforks and stuff, but a lot of times I'm saying it from a more sarcastic point of view, as in You have, a good example is I say, well, you have, you're always looking for these revenue streams or trying to increase revenue streams. And many years ago, I made the observation that the viewer, the platform was fairly independent. It was fairly inconsequential. It was the content that mattered the most. And that was where your revenue streams would be if you look at that. So we look at Linden Lab and we say, well, since our Lord and Savior, if you want to call him that, the pariah of Second Life had left, we had ended up with Mark, and Mark, as much as there's criticism for this guy, he was acting in his element, which was business aspect. So, immediately he, being a hammer, thought all things were nails, and his nail was, it was going to be, everything was business. So we saw the SL Enterprise, and that kind of, kicked him in the head. And, then we have, Rod. And, Rod thinks in a way that is video game oriented. And, I don't fault him for it, but I do say that, things like open-ended metaverses or, Metaverse, I don't quite give, Second Life the Metaverse title. It's more like a meta world or a meta galaxy, but that aside, we say that video game mentality does have a percentage where it does influence. It does have similarities, but those after that 10%, the other 90% is very different. And if you try to force feed video gaming mentality down the throats of this sort of open-ended system, what you end up with is a metaphor share, and that is the most dangerous position they could be in, because metaphor shares the difference between wide acceptance, brilliantly wide acceptance, where not only do people accept it, but they go looking for it. They go looking to embrace it, and it's a very fine line, because the other side of it is that you'll have universal rejection or violent rejection, and the best way to explain that would be banner ads on online. We hate them. We hate being interrupted with interstitials and banner ads and video advertisements. No, that's a metaphor shift, because you're breaking the immersion. You're breaking the agreed social contract between you and the content. So when you do that on a video game aspect, it really hurts you bad.
It's funny, we were talking earlier, and we've got no time to continue it, unfortunately, about, the value of immersion as opposed to all the sort of mobile tech and things. And of course, it's odd that Second Life has gone from a CEO that was driven by business to another one who's now driven by entertainment. And of course, there's been a lot of talk, rather belatedly this week, about another Will Wright, in fact, joining Linden Labs board. He's actually been there a while, but people have just realized it. And he, of course, is games and entertainment orientated. So we'll have to see. I'm going to ask you one very quick question, because we couldn't get Doosa on voice, but there was one question we had come in that was asking, could or should institutions, for example, universities, be showing more interest in universal virtual reality protocols and viewers?
That is an open-ended question, but I will say it depends on your scope. It depends on what you want, what you're trying to achieve. I mean, if your goal is to be accessible to as many people as possible, more open-ended, then yes, by all means, you should be looking for more open-ended protocols like that. If you are trying to achieve a certain goal where those things don't matter up front, then you shouldn't be bending over backwards to try and do that. It's definitely something to consider, whether your protocols, your file formats, and whatever are all open-ended, open source, open, access, because that gives a larger base for your audience to participate with or even build upon. I mean, we have universities building stuff like Open Cobalt, which are, nice decentralized systems. I wouldn't say that it's, a system that's ready for prime time, but, we go in that direction where we have these open systems. And if that's what your goal is, to have open access everywhere, then yes, by all means, you should be looking into being as open as possible.
I think the education community has actually been it's been pretty big on the take up of these things. They were the first to really adopt Wonderland, even though it's now Open Wonderland, of course, and take on Open Sims, often because they were driven by cost out of Second Life to the Open Sims.
Which was, a really dumb idea from Linden Lab. Congratulations, guys.
Yeah, as usual. So, well, we could go on all night, but I'm afraid we're running out of time.
Can I just say one last thing before we go?
Of course you can, yeah.
This is my final message to Linden Lab themselves. Rod, if you're listening, your goal is to focus on marketplace and integration in here. The content is king. Branding is your key.
Okay. If you're listening, Rod, you heard it here first, if you haven't heard it before. Okay, well, thanks, Will, very much for being here. It's been very good talking to you, and maybe we'll get you back at some point. We're going to be, in the next series, I hope we're going to have more sort of discussion forums. So rather than just one-to-one, we might actually have a few little panels and debates and stuff. So thank you very much for being here, and
it was a pleasure being here.
Good luck with all the interop and everything else.
Well, if you see a big nuclear mushroom cloud on the horizon, it's probably us.
Great. Okay, well, that's CrossWorlds for this week, folks. We will be back again in 2 weeks' time. My guest in 2 weeks will be Fleet Took, who, talking of education, is an educator, but she's equally involved in communities in virtual worlds, and has not only moved into Open Sim by moving a Second Life community, well, not moving, but maintaining in duplicate a Second Life community on Reaction Grid, but has now moved into her own Open Sim, which is actually self-hosted. In other words, she's taken the idea of just making her own computer into a sim that connects to the hypergrid. So we'll be talking about all that in 2 weeks' time, and I hope you can join me then. Meanwhile, thanks for watching, everybody, and thank you again to Will Burns, my guest tonight, and we will see you soon. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.